Today on Face the Nation from the Aspen Ideas Festival in Colorado, an interview with Attorney General Eric Holder. The Attorney General stirred up a hornet's nest when he asked a federal judge to overturn Arizona's new immigration law. Republican senators are in a rage. What's his response? We'll find out, and we'll also get the latest on the administration plans for closing Guantanamo and when and where he now plans to try 9/11 mastermind Kahlid Sheik Mohammed. We'll also get the latest news on that Russian spy scandal. Then I'll have some final words on the wise men who created our national parks. But first, Attorney General Eric Holder on Face the Nation.
Face the Nation with CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from Aspen, Colorado, Bob Schieffer.
And we're in the Benedict Music Tent at the Aspen Ideas Festival in Aspen, and we're joined by the Attorney General, Eric Holder. Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for being with us.
It's good to be here.
Let's just start with the top of the news. This bizarre ring of Russian spies, or whatever they were, after they pled guilty, a deal was worked out to exchange them with some people that the United States had an interest in. Just give us the details. What's this about?
Well, the 10 people here in the United States pled guilty to acting as agents of Russia without registering with our government, and we essentially orchestrated a swap so that we had access to, or got back, 4 people who had been charged in Russia with conducting intelligence activities on behalf of Western countries.
What do we get here? I mean, the United States, the FBI spent 10 years tracking these people. Do we have any indication that they stole anything of significance?
Well, they didn't pass any classified information, and for that reason they were not charged with espionage. On the other hand, we have broken up a pretty substantial network that consisted of what they called illegals, 10 people who were in different parts of the country and who were trying to, in some ways, insinuate themselves into our country and find ways in which they could get information from a variety of sources. They actually did make contact with certain people and did obtain certain information from people who were unwitting in their interaction with these people.
Well, what do we get in exchange, the 4 people that they're being exchanged for?
These are people, as I said, who have been charged with intelligence activities in Russia and in whom we had a great deal of interest, as well as England, and we have gotten those people back.
Mr. Attorney General, most of the time when the FBI spends that much time and that many resources on watching people like this, prosecutors usually want to prosecute them. They want to put them in jail. Why did they agree to make this deal?
Well, there were a variety of reasons. I mean, I think chief among them being the concern with the swap that we ultimately concluded. They could have been placed in jail, but we saw this as an opportunity to get back to England and get back to the United States these 4 people in whom we had a great deal of interest. And it was on that basis that we decided to make that decision.
Why did you decide to close in on them now? Why was it decided to break it up, break this whole thing up?
Because one of the members, the husband of one of the couples was in the process of going to France and then on his way to Russia, and the concern was that if we let him go, we would not be able to get him back. There were other operational considerations that we've not been in a position to reveal and cannot reveal at this point. There were operational concerns that if we did not act at that point, the possibility existed that we would not be able to break up the ring in the totality in the way that we have now.
It appears that they didn't pose much of a threat to this country, did they?
Well, they were acting as agents of a foreign power, and therefore they were certainly a threat in that regard. The potential for what they might have done was, I think, a serious thing. And the reality is that we had them under observation for over 10 years, monitored their activities, saw what they were trying to do. They were supported by Russia to a very great degree, hundreds of thousands of dollars, great amounts of communication between them and Russia. Russia considered these people very important to their intelligence gathering activities, and we agree that, in fact, they were important to the Russians, and it was for that reason that we monitored them and took this extremely seriously.
One question that we've gotten a lot of emails on and a lot of calls at CBS News: what happens now to the children?
The children have all been repatriated. We did so consistent with what their parents' wishes were, and to the extent that we had children who were close to majority or majority, they made their own decisions as to where they wanted to go. So the children have all been handled, I think, in an appropriate way.
Because some of those children, because they were born here, would actually be U.S. citizens.
Right, and to the extent that they had the ability to make choices and were old enough to make them, they made their decisions and they've gone back with their parents.
Let's turn to the other big story of the week. You filed suit to ask a judge to overturn Arizona's new immigration law. It has put Republicans in a rage. Here's what Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said. He said, suing the people of Arizona for what the federal government has utterly failed to do will not help secure our borders. Senators Kyle and McCain, the Arizona senators, say Attorney General Holder speaks to the federal government's responsibility to enforce immigration law, but what are people of Arizona to do when the federal government fails its responsibility? So why did you file this lawsuit?
I understand, first off, the frustration of the people of Arizona and the concerns that they have with regard to the amount of illegal immigration that occurs. But the solution that the Arizona legislature came up with is inconsistent with our federal constitution. It is responsibility of the federal government to decide immigration policy. And what the Arizona legislature came up with was a statute that is inconsistent with the federal constitution. It's preempted by the federal constitution. And on the basis of preemption, we decided to file a lawsuit. We have an immigration policy that takes into account a whole variety of things, international relations, national security concerns, and it is the responsibility of the federal government, as opposed to states doing it on a patchwork basis, to decide exactly what it is our policy should be with regard to immigration. It was on that basis that we filed a lawsuit.
You've heard the same criticism that I have. Some are saying that it's just all politics, that what you're trying to do is to brand Republicans as anti-immigration or, in fact, anti-Hispanic before the elections in November.
No, not true at all. The basis for this was a legal determination by those of us at the Justice Department that the law was inconsistent with the Constitution. And I think one has to also understand that there are a substantial number of Republicans and people in law enforcement who thought that the decision that we made to file this lawsuit was, in fact, the correct one. So it is not a monolith. There's not a Republican monolith here where people are saying in the Republican Party that this was an inappropriate decision.
When the Arizona law was first passed, both you and the president expressed concerns that it would lead to racial profiling because it allows the police, if they think someone might be in this country illegally, gives them the right to stop them, and they have to produce papers to show that, in fact, they are citizens. Yet your lawsuit doesn't talk at all about racial profiling, or if it even mentions it, it's just barely. It just talks about the federal government is being preempted from a duty that it has to perform. Why did you choose to go that route?
Well, we wanted to go out with what we thought was our strongest initial argument and to focus on what we thought is the most serious problem with the law as it now exists. Doesn't mean that if the law, for whatever reason, happened to go into effect, that 6 months from now, a year from now, we might not look at the impact the law has had and whether or not there has been that racial profiling impact. And if that was the case, we would have the tools and we would bring suit on that basis.
Are you saying, though, that states and local governments have no responsibility when it comes to enforcing immigration policy, that that's solely the responsibility of the federal government?
No, states and local governments can certainly help the federal government enforce immigration laws. What we're saying is that they cannot pass laws that are inconsistent with the federal laws or do things that contravene federal policy when it comes to the enforcement of our immigration laws. And the Arizona statute, if you look at the guts of it, really puts in place a whole variety of things that are inconsistent with what we have decided to do as a federal government. And it was on that basis that we decided to file the lawsuit.
The trouble in the Gulf continues. You said a couple of weeks, or it's getting to be months ago, you announced that the government is going to open an investigation to determine if the conduct of BP officials constituted criminal behavior. It was a very unusual thing for a law enforcement or prosecutor to announce that. Number one, and when you did announce it, I would add, the stock of BP fell. It really tumbled. Why did you choose to make that announcement?
Well, I was very careful in what I said. I did not say that BP was under investigation. What I did say was that we had opened a criminal investigation, but did not indicate who the subject of the investigation was. And that is a very serious thing, because there are a variety of entities and a variety of people who are the subjects of that investigation. And for people to conclude that BP is the focus of this investigation might not be correct. And
But it might be correct.
I'm not going to go any further than what I said in New Orleans and what I've said today. But given the extraordinary nature of what our nation is facing there, we thought it was appropriate to let the American people know that the federal government understood what was going on here, and that we were using the full panoply of our powers to open both a criminal investigation and a civil inquiry to ensure that the American people don't pay a cent for the cleanup, that we were going to do all that we could to restore the environment to that which it was looked like before, and perhaps improve it, and to make sure that we held accountable anybody who was responsible for the spill.
So where is the investigation now? Should we be expecting indictments anytime soon, or any actions?
I mean, the investigation is ongoing. Our primary concern at this point is getting the spill stopped, and hopefully that will happen relatively quickly. The investigation is ongoing. We're in the process of accumulating documents, talking to witnesses on both the criminal side as well as the civil side, but I wouldn't put a timetable on when we'll be.
All right, let's take a break here, and when we come back in 60 seconds, we'll talk about a lot of the other things that are on your plate, including what are you going to do about Kahlid Sheik Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11. Back in a minute. And we're back now with the Attorney General, Eric Holder. Mr. Attorney General, what is your current thinking on what is to be done with the 9/11 mastermind, Kahlid Sheik Mohammed? You at first were going to try him in New York. Now it appears that he's going to be tried someplace else. Where are you on this?
Well, no decision's been made yet as to exactly where the trial is going to occur. What we want to do is to hold accountable as effectively as we can the people who were responsible for what happened on September the 11th. We've had to deal with a variety of things, funding and dealing with Congress, the concerns that have been expressed by local officials. We're trying to work our way through that, and as soon as we can, we will make a decision as to where that trial will occur. But we're bound and determined to hold Kahlid Sheik Mohammed and those who worked with him, hold them responsible for what happened on September 11th.
Have you decided yet whether it'll be before a military tribunal or a civilian court?
We are still in the process of considering that as well. The recommendation I made was that it should be done in a civilian court.
Are you still leaning in that direction?
That is something that we are in the process still of working our way through.
Can I ask you the obvious question? Mm-hmm. What is taking so long to make this decision?
Well, I mean, there were certainly unanticipated things that happened. One looks at the way in which Congress has looked at this and the question of whether or not we will have sufficient funding in order to bring these cases. There have been restrictions that have been talked about by Congress, some of which have been imposed. We're going to have to work with Congress in order, I think, ultimately to bring this case to trial. And I think that given the magnitude of what happened on September the 11th and the need to bring justice and closure to this, that people in Congress need to work with us in the executive branch to come up with a way in which we can put these people on trial. Justice has been denied too long.
Well, this controversy now that goes on and on and on, some argue that a person, that these people, that many people feel are not criminals, that they're military combatants, that they should not be read their rights. They should not enjoy all the rights that those of us in America have. Why can't you try them before a military tribunal?
I look at it the other way. Why can't we use a great criminal justice system that has proven effective in these kinds of cases over the years, that has proven effective in a wide range of cases over the last 200 years? Why can't we use that system? It is that system that we have often said distinguishes us from other countries. It's one that I'm extremely proud of and one that I think is extremely capable of. We've tried over 300 terrorists in our criminal justice system. We've gotten very long sentences where that was appropriate. There have been a really limited number of people who have been tried in the military tribunals, which is not to say that they should not be used. But at the exclusion, I think if we try to exclude the federal criminal justice system, we are taking away one of the tools that we have, and I think ultimately we make this nation much weaker. That's a very dangerous thing, I think, to take that tool out of our hands.
There was some talk at one point that you might move this trial to perhaps a military base in Virginia. Is that still an option?
There are any number of possibilities that we are considering, and we have not made any final decisions.
Can you, in fact, seek the death penalty when you take someone before a military tribunal? I know you can in a civilian court, because I've had some lawyers tell me that that might not be possible.
You can certainly seek the death penalty. There is real question as to whether or not somebody can plead guilty and get the death penalty on the military side. You can certainly do that in a civilian setting.
But you might not be able to do that if they plead guilty in a military tribunal.
Military tribunal, right. There's real question about that.
It's interesting that nobody has made much of that this has become so controversial. I'm surprised that those of you who favor the civilian trials haven't said to some who want to put these people before a military tribunal, look, we might not be able to get the death penalty.
One of the things I think that is particularly bothersome to me is that this really has become something that has become political. The politicization of this issue when we're dealing with ultimate national security issues is something that disturbs me a great deal. We're dealing with the deaths of 3,000 people on September the 11th. We're dealing with the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, a person who was a key part of Al-Qaeda. And to have Republicans and Democrats arguing about this in a political way, as opposed to dealing with the substance that we have to really focus on, is something that I think is regrettable and has resulted, I think, in the delays that we have seen.
One of the president's first acts when he became president was to say that he would close Guantanamo, our prison facility, within a year. Guantanamo is still open. When is that question going to be resolved? And is that, in fact, any more a priority for the administration?
It is still a priority. Guantanamo serves as a recruiting tool for Al-Qaeda. The intelligence shows that, continues to show that that is true. It has served as a wedge between us and our traditional allies. We have done all that we can to try to close Guantanamo. I think people have to understand we've done a substantial amount of work. When we started there were 240 people who were in Guantanamo. We're down to about 180. We have looked at each one of those prisoners who are there, each one of those detainees, and made individualized determinations as to what ought to happen to them. Those who can be tried, those who can be repatriated, those who will be detained under the laws of war. That has been done. Again, we need Congress to come up with an alternative facility. We've identified one in Illinois, the Thompson facility, that we think we could bring people to. We've not gotten the funding from Congress in order to do that, but this is still a priority for this administration.
Do you think that this decision will be made before the November elections?
We have made the decision. This is something that we want to do. We need congressional support in order to do it. We have put in the request that we have for the 2011 budget, money to acquire the Thompson facility and to change at least a portion of it so that we could hold people that are now in Guantanamo, hold them in that facility. We need Congress to appropriate the money to do it.
At this point, Congress has not been willing to do that. Do you have any state other than Illinois, I guess it is, that says that they would be willing to do this? And I don't think that's even certain, is it? Is there any place else that has agreed they'd be willing to have this facility?
We actually have had expressions of interest from a couple of other states. I don't want to necessarily talk about them now because I think we have a very firm commitment from the people in Thompson and from state officials in Illinois that they are willing to convert a portion of that facility that is underused and would be sold to the federal government for the detention of people who are now held in Guantanamo.
You know, I remember during the campaign, Senator Obama said he wanted to close Guantanamo. Senator McCain, said that he wanted to close Guantanamo. And I think those of us in the press bear a little responsibility in all of this, because we forgot to ask the follow-up, how are you going to do it? Has it not proven to be a lot more difficult than you thought it was?
Well, it's proven more difficult because there have been people who have changed their positions. I think, as you said, Senator McCain certainly was in favor of closing Guantanamo. President Bush has expressed a desire to close Guantanamo. Our military leaders have indicated a desire to close Guantanamo. Those people who are on the front lines have said Guantanamo should be closed. This is another instance where I think politics, unfortunately, has entered into this discussion. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. We have proven an ability to hold in our federal prison system people convicted of, charged with terrorist offenses very effectively, very safely. There's no reason to believe that people held in Guantanamo cannot be held wherever we put them in the United States, again, very safely and very effectively. And so it is our hope that we will be able to persuade Congress to give us the ability to open that Thompson facility.
You know, early on in the administration, you created quite a stir when you said in a speech that we'd become a nation of cowards because we weren't talking enough about race. A lot of people criticized you for that. A lot of people applauded you for saying that. Are you sorry now that you said that, or what exactly did you mean by that, and how do you feel today after some time has passed?
I mean, I think that ours is a great nation, but one of the great things that we have always we've always wrestled with from the inception of this nation is the question of race. If one looks at the history of this country in the 19th century, race was, I think, the dominant issue. You look at the history of this country in the 20th century, race was one of the dominant issues. It remains an issue that I think still divides us. And if you look at the demographic changes this nation is about to undergo, we have to have, I believe, an open and honest discussion about race, ethnicity. The diversity that we are about to see, an unprecedented diversity in this country, can be a great source of strength for this nation, but if not dealt with appropriately, can also be something that is very divisive. And what I was trying to say in that speech is that we should be honest with one another and not feel that we have to retreat into our cocoons and only say that which we consider to be safe, that we ought to have the strength of character to say that which we really feel, and people who are receiving it should understand that those things are said in good faith, to just have an open, honest dialogue about something that I think for too long we have not been willing to discuss.
Do you see any sign that we are doing better on that?
No, slightly. I think certainly that speech that I gave generated some conversation. I'm not sure I heard all the applause that you were talking about with regard to those remarks. I think perhaps we are getting to a place where, a better place. I think the fact that we have an African American as president, perhaps an African American as an attorney general, is a spur in that regard. But I think there's still a lack of desire, and understandable, I think, in some ways. People feel uncomfortable talking about racial issues out of fear that if they express things, they will be characterized in a way that's not fair. I think that there is still a need for a dialogue about things racial that we've not engaged in.
Mr. Attorney General, thank you for being with us in Aspen.
Thank you.
On Face the Nation.
This portion of Face the Nation is sponsored by the Dow Chemical Company and the Human Element, the element that brings meaning to chemistry.
We've been coming out here to the Aspen Ideas Festival for a long time, and in recent years we've had a lot of fun hooking on a side trip. One year we drove to Mount Rushmore and sat on George Washington's head. That one made the Christmas card. Last year we went to the Grand Canyon. Teddy Roosevelt said it was the greatest sight in America, and it's hard to argue with that. This year we started out in Yellowstone, another pretty good sight to see. And by the way, Old Faithful is still faithful, blowing off steam every 90 minutes. Every time we come out here, it reminds me of the wisdom and the foresight of those who set aside these lands so that future generations, as Lyndon Johnson once wrote, can see the world as God made it and not just the way it was when we got through with it. But every time I come out here, it also makes me wonder, if we face the same choices today as those wise men who set aside these lands, what would our decision be? I don't know the answer to that, but it is a question worth considering. Back in a minute. That's it from Aspen. We'll be back in Washington next week for Face the Nation.